You're listening to Heal Through Humor, hosted by yours truly, Talia Bombola. I'm a licensed therapist on a mission to help others learn about themselves and laugh along the way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Heal Through Humor, the live podcast. I have a very special guest today. We have known each other for quite some time. I'm going to see if I have luck with Instagram today to invite him in. Let's see. I think it worked. Yes. Awesome.
We are here.
It's live. How are you?
Doing well in yourself?
I'm doing well as well. I think this is the first time I've done one of these from my office, so I'm like a little turned around today.
Trust me, I was in the same thing of like, where do I sit? What
Yeah.
do I...
What am I supposed to look like?
That's probably the one I should have focused on more, but now that my anxiety is rising.
Yeah, perfect. So how are you? What's new? What's happening? What have you been up to?
Oh my gosh. Well, let's see what's new. So I'm adding another state to my licensure. So I'm currently in California, Tennessee. Now I'll be in Idaho. Hopefully I'll get that back in about 2 weeks.
Nice.
The practice is 100% virtual. So right now it's like split 50-50 about California and Tennessee. But I'm loving life. I mean, it's a great season of life right now. It's one of those that I know you and I have had this conversation so much, but when you're a clinician, you don't ever think of like what the future can hold. And so like when you're sitting in a spot where the practice is going well, I've been on my own now for a year, it's hard not to have gratitude and abundance in your heart.
True. Yeah, I think we imagine what it's like to survive getting to that point. And then once we're there, it's like, oh, wait, I actually didn't plan for this either. Like,
yeah, I didn't plan for success. You're like, wait a second, I'm not overdrafting.
Yeah.
Things are well. Like, and you go to like your survival manual and it has nothing about well in it.
Nothing. I'm so glad that you're at that spot. And for people who haven't seen your profile before, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and what you do. And I know we attempted this before on Zoom, and then Zoom was like, I'm just going to eat this interview entirely. So now we're back, but please introduce to everyone.
It was spiritual warfare across the map there, you know, like, yeah, I didn't record it. And it's like, that's evil. Anyways, so my name is Adam Luke. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also a relational coach, but I have a practice called Wild Ethos Counseling. And so the whole reason a lot of people go, well, that's like a mouthful right there. What's Wild Ethos Counseling mean? So what I wanted is so much of my own personal journey, and my journey also as a licensed professional, was feeling as if individuals wanted to fit me into a cookie cutter. And I didn't fit. It just doesn't work. I mean, I have like termed myself the therapist that looks like a truck driver, because it's the truth. So hard for me to like then go to the Huntington Beach, Newport vibe when I look like this, and this is just how it's going to be. I can't change the face.
And in like the brewery scene and like the roasters coffee kind of a vibe, you wouldn't have a place here.
I'm telling you, when a barista calls, it's a 95% close rate. Like they're in. It's
like, I am you and you are me.
Like, where do you work? REI? Perfect. So this will be your city. Like, it just closes right from there. But I wanted to focus on, in my practice, taking what's wild about a person, that passion, a person's spirit, who they are. And I wanted it to be a focus point in the journey we go in therapy. And then that ethos side is essentially, the term goes back to like, what is your creed? What is your principles? What are your commands for yourself? And so that's why Wild Ethos Counseling exists, because I wanted to be very, very pointed with making sure that my clients are able to be who they are. They don't have to turn into someone else. What we're trying to do is further refine them in this process and let them be more represented in the lives they live.
That's such a wonderful mission statement for a practice as well, as now with all, and we'll talk about this today definitely, but with everything going on with social media, it's like, well, who does this person want me to be? Who do I want to be? Will I be accepted if I'm my true, authentic self? And I found, like, I post memes pretty regularly still, but I posted one and there was a really big back and forth in the comments of like, well, therapists aren't supposed to give advice, but what are they doing if they don't? And this and that. And my view is like, I mean, we can, like, technically anybody can do anything. It doesn't mean they should. And if we did sparingly, it is still couched in, based on, we've talked about this in our last episode, based on what I know about you and what you've shared with me, this decision either will or will not fit what you're trying to grow towards, is typically how like advice would sound from a therapist. And if you've worked together long enough, I do think we can give some advisement. It doesn't mean you have to take it. I've had many clients where I'm like, in an alternate world, would you like to tell me, like, would you like me to tell you exactly what to do? And they're like, oh, that'd be so great. And I'm like, all right, just pulling at random here, do this. And they're like, I don't want to do that. I'm like, see, it wouldn't matter. Like, it wouldn't matter if I gave you direct. You have to create that spirit inside of you and let it shine through. And I think that's what your practice, it sounds like, really serves to do for your clients.
Absolutely. I mean, I always laugh when it comes to like, well, do you give advice? And it's like, well, is it advice if I give you options? Like, because you know, advice can be a lot of different things. When we talk people who are maybe in our spheres of influence that are our friends, our family, whatever, they'll tell you, well, I would do this.
Exactly.
I'm probably not going to sit there and be like, well, this is what you need to do. My system isn't your system. But I could be like, well, wait a second. So you're bringing up like 3 different options. What would that lead to? And it's funny because then you'll get, like, again, sometimes other therapists enter the space and they'll be like, well, I wouldn't do that. Like, well, then fine. I don't know what your is.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to necessarily send my clients out there in the world without a helmet or training wheels and just be like, bumps and scrapes are a part of the process. Like, they don't have to get hit by a Mack truck before change happens. And that's where I feel sometimes we have this big old debate, especially as therapists. I mean, I love throwing a ton of therapists in a room because, oh my God, do you have some discussions? And there's how much projection can come out. You're like, I thought we were supposed to be very open and nice to each other. And this just seems like a lot of rage-filled people.
Yeah, it seems very closed and judgmental. I don't...
Like, I don't know about this. Like, psychodynamically, this sounds like a shit show.
I'm doing some analysis, and I'm really feeling like this is not a safe, warm, loving environment. So that's just what I'm going to say.
Just some awareness.
But I'll leave. Yeah. It's a wild world out there. How have you been able to navigate being a therapist on social media?
Yeah. It's a different experience trying to be a therapist on social media because, again, I realized that me just sharing inspirational like memes and cute hashtags, I couldn't keep up with the other people, so I had to just be me, and it has worked out because I bring in that sense of what does it mean to be genuine, and I want people to be able to move into a space of vulnerability. And how can I do that? I have to be vulnerable on what I do in the social media space.
Yeah.
You know, something that I know that you'll align with this, but something that was drilled into us in school is, you know, never let your potential clients or your current clients kind of know where you fall in a political spectrum, religious spectrum, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
What I found was essentially then what was being trained into us is for us to just be like this vacuous teddy bear. like we're there, but there's no substance, right? So something that happened a couple years ago that really surprised me is I started letting people know, like, hey, I wasn't born in a barn, but I was raised on a farm. So like there's like different things in my background. If I come from a very blue collar family, and in letting this out more, I started to attract more people that I think for the longest time, a lot of people thought, oh, you know, the rednecks don't want therapy. And I don't think that's what that was. I think it was more of the rednecks can't find anyone to identify with. And that's why Jesus built me to look like a truck driver. So I'm, again,
like beard, more beard. There we go.
No, seriously. I know. I think it's like that meme where he oops too much. Like,
God making me the sexy. It's like, oops, a little too much. Yeah.
I know. I think that might be a little bit of where I'm at. But what I did was I said, you know what? I'm going to just show up. I'm going to do videos from being out in the wilderness. I'm going to do talks about how we can have interventions of whether it's fishing or hiking or whatever, and I was going to see where it goes. And it took off. And it all goes back to the fact that I think in therapy, sometimes we can get too cookie cutterish where healing and I mean, come on, let's be honest. I know yours is different. Your therapy office is much different than other ones. But I mean,
True.
I swear to goodness, we could go into like multiple therapists' office and be like, did I ever leave the same building? Like there's always, I'm telling you, if you're ever like, is this person legit? Look for the succulents. If they have a succulent, like anyways, so
I have many succulents, and I have succulents on my office wall at home. I feel like it's a vibe, you know.
It absolutely is. It actually speaks to more of like therapists because we'll survive if you don't feed us at all. So like,
metaphoric. Like if you walk in and you don't see one, you should probably ask them like, "Are you okay inside? Do you also have a therapist?"
Okay, all right, they're late. Yeah. Oh, COVID. Anyways, but I mean, that's why I thought that the therapy space had to look more inclusive, especially to men, because a huge demographic I work with.
Yeah.
And when I was sitting around talking to a lot of other therapists, like, oh yeah, I work on men and men's issues. And I always like sat back and I was like, what's men's issues? Like, I want to know.
The word issues, from what I've studied in evolutionary psychology, issue is like a big red flag. Problem is actually the preferred word because problems have solutions. So really, if you were working on problems, it would be, I work with men on solving their problems, not men's issue. Only women call it, we think you have issues. You don't think you have issues. Like, we're the problem.
I'm gonna break bro code a little bit and say we own both sides of that. So like,
that's on you.
But when we get into it, it's great that you brought that up. The actual verbiage and the language we use can either attract a person into that space or it can drive a person away from it.
Yeah.
You're right. Men, when you talk about issues, that makes that sound like something we have no ability to solve.
Just ongoing, just like, oh.
Oh, I love it. Here's my tissue for my issue. I love that. What I go into is we have to, especially when we look at working with men, we have to find a way that we can make the problem solvable. Because if we've been making it impossible, then what happens is you get a lot of people that end up accepting stereotypes, like it will never get better. And like when I work with my guys, when we're working with like maybe marital issues or trying to build better intimacy and connection with their significant others, it's funny because I love to go back to that love story and like, so why the heck did you even want to like invite this person into your life? These accepted norms of like, well, I was told when you get married things are different. And I got to sit there and I got to go, okay, well, did that self-fulfilling prophecy prove itself true, or did you pull your foot off the gas? Like, I feel like so many times it's almost like that Eddie Izzard comedy routine of like, all right, we have a flag. There's a flag. This is a marriage. And it's like, well, no, wait a second. Like, we could still go on dates. And it's like, this is a marriage now. We don't do dates.
We don't do.
Well, like, but how about romance and intimacy? Just to procreate. Like, there's just like
very functional. That's about it. You are married now. Forget it.
So there's a lot of different things that all of a sudden men move into that it goes, well, wait a second, is this, and I love this line. I have so many guys that tell me I didn't want the marriage of my parents. And I go, well, then why did we use the marriage you didn't want as the blueprint for the one you have? And it's crazy because when we move into this spot of where I encourage them of like, okay, you need to learn how to date your spouse again. And so I'm working with people that they've been married for 25, 30 years and they laugh at me because they're like, yeah, well, you're a young bearded punk and you're telling me to go out and date again. And it's like, no, try it. Just try it. And I
know how it goes.
I have the law of threes. Give me three solid. Let's see what happens. And what's interesting is normally on like week 2, and however we've been able to do this, all of a sudden I'll start getting the reports of like, we're not fighting like we used to. Or I love it. I had one client for the longest time was like, I don't know, I feel weird. And I was like, why do you feel weird? And he's like, she's coming up to me and she's telling me things that she likes about me. I was like, well, would you like her to go back to calling you a bastard? Like what? Like we can go back.
Yeah.
Like stop doing what you're doing and see how it works out. And so in doing so, all of a sudden then I watch as a lot of my male clients start to get that self-confidence boost.
Yes.
Also, they then are, I like to call it, opened up for vulnerability. Because so many times we glaze over those moments, you know, like you can have the gourmet experience of taking her to a nice dinner and maybe having, you know, an overnight stay at a hotel you guys have always wanted to stay at and all that. And it was always rushed, right? There was always plans. You go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. It's almost like the date had check boxes, right? But we never left any room in between those things to experience like, man, have you felt gratitude? Do you feel like happiness? Do you feel content? Like what is it like to have your significant other hold your hand? When was the last time that you held hands that way?
Yep.
And I love it because that's when I start to see the light bulbs go off of like, oh, it can be different.
Yes.
And that's where I then try to empower them to don't take your foot off the gas. Like be as focused and precise with your actions with your spouse than you would be with like your business, your personal business. You know, how much time and effort did you put into buying the family car? And how much time and effort have you put into your wife or significant other?
Yeah. I think many times, and especially now with how many tasks and roles we have to take on as an individual and as part of a unit, and if we're working for somebody else or working for ourselves, like the business side of us and the personal side of ourselves, we often take for granted our spouse. And it's in the beginning when I work with couples and even for it's not intentional. Like, I don't think the plan is like, I'm going to create an environment so toxic that my partner questions their worth. Like, unless you're not well, I don't think that's the majority plan of why people get married. Obviously, the plan is that's going to go on autopilot. I did the thing. I checked it off. We're dating, we're in a relationship, we're engaged, we're married, boom. And now, oh, yeah, I didn't think I would be able to have my lifespan be this long to build in to enjoy this relationship. And it gets taken for granted or put onto the back burner because we made a legal agreement that person will always be there. And legally here in California, we know it's going to take at least 6 months if they wanted to leave. So it's kind of like we have a built-in buy-in back of our brain of like, it's not going to get that bad. But then you double that, triple that, and it just becomes the new way of being. That's when things linger for a long time and we get resentful because we were raised with, what's the saying? Men marry women hoping they never change, and women marry men hoping they will change.
Absolutely.
And we're both going into it with those mindsets. That's going to be very uncomfortable. And I think the key from what I've recommended to couples is like, expect them to change. You want them to want to change. Like, that should be the goal. You should not be married to the same exact person, like typology wise, in 50 to 60 years if you're doing it right. And I've written that in the speeches I've given at weddings too. And there's some people who laugh, and then the ones who get it. And like the couples who have been married a long time are like, that's solid advice. Like, he gets it. And that's the truth, is you have to put in an active effort. Just because you're married doesn't mean you stop dating or stop showing the person why you fell in love with them in the first place.
Well, and I'll like piggyback onto that idea. That was like, no matter what you do, your significant other is still changing. Like, it doesn't matter if like you guys have gotten married and for the first year of marriage it has been a total train wreck and there's been a lot of frustration. That person is not the same person you stood there before and said, I do.
Yep.
And so many couples, we don't provide that space that this person can be different. Just like one segment of my practice, and I don't know why I have it, but I love it, is working with empty nesters. And I work with empty nesters. A lot of times they sit there, they've launched their last kid, and they look at each other and they're like, who the hell are you? And it's like, oh, I was the nanny. Oh, I was the paycheck. What do we do? And you find out that so much of their time and effort was focused on the children. And I think if we really bring this back, you were sort of alluding to it. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So like when we're single, we're looking for that relationship. Under that, our like how we make money, our finances, consider that as a house. Well, then all of a sudden it seems like in most lives we click all three like immediately in some time frame. And I have the relationship, I have the house, and then now what do I put at the number one spot? It's not the relationship, it's the financial aspect of life. So how do I make money? And it's this idea that then there's going to be trickle down. It's not Reaganomics. It's not going to work because you're not going to be able to make enough money to make someone not want your love and affection. And if you can, they're not in it for the right reasons. So anyway, we go back to this idea of, well, here we sit, we've spent 30 years with each other, but time does not mean that we were present with each other.
Correct.
And so when we're talking about the time aspect, then I talk about like, well, what would you guys like to do? And a lot of times I love it because I'll watch them look at each other and they don't have an answer.
They're like, you want to go? We like to one, two, nope, not what I thought we were going to say.
Because you'll hear like, one's like, oh, I just want to like die by a television. And the other one's like, I'll be, in Europe. And you're like, wait a second, I think we can actually find mutual ground here. What did you like to do? And that's going back to that love story. And you find out like, oh no, we had tenacity and spontaneity and we used to do all these things. And so why did you stop? Oh, well, because we were told to grow up. Like it's like growing up is a club that no one wants to be in, but once they're in it, everyone else is miserable. And
I'm not doing this alone. Get in the club.
Yeah. Oh no, I hate my marriage, but you should get married. It's good, wonderful.
The best is giving like inverse advice. Like if you're single, giving marital advice, or marriage, giving single advice or dating advice. We can all learn from each other. I want to be very clear. We can all learn from each other. But it's when they're like, "Oh, it's the worst thing in the world. When are you going to do it?" And you're like, "That wasn't really a good pitch." Like,
I love the other way. It's almost like the world's worst timeshare, where they're like, "Oh no. It's going to be wonderful." And then you get married, you come back from the honeymoon, you show up at your friend's house while they're ripping a cocaine line and what's going on? They're like, oh, marriage sucks, but how was it? You're
like, why didn't you tell me this before? They're like, oh no, you never would have done it. I never would have done it.
Don't go into sales. I love it. It's the truth. Because like it goes back to also like the humble brag. The humble brag is like, oh, I'm married and I've got a good job and we just closed on a house and we do all this. And it's like, okay, but how much like love is filled in that house? And they're like, where do you get love? Like,
is that on my mortgage? Is that part of the PMI? They didn't do that in closing costs. Yeah.
Kind of love. It's like 8% a year. So like, other things we've got to look at. And that's what I love about the work that I do, is being able to get people to actually turn towards each other and realize like, no, you loved this person so much, you said forever would be better with them than without them. And now you sit 30 years down the road and you let the noise of life come in. And in letting that noise came in, you forgot why you did this. And that's what goes back to that ethos. What's your creed? What are the things that you want? I'm tired of hearing like, oh, well, there's a recession coming, or there's this coming, or this president's in, or that president's in. I think there's so many people that sort of abdicate their sphere of influence. They forget how much influence they have in the world around you. Like, sure, there could be like more conducive variables out there in the space. Like, I would love if house prices went back to previous COVID, like before that whole nonsense, but that doesn't mean that I lack agency in my life right now.
True.
And many of us that are sort of sitting on the sidelines that are saying like, well, I'm only going to participate in life when the terms are right. And guess what? I sit in that thought process of, if you're telling me that you're only going to open the door when opportunity knocks, what happens when you don't have your bags packed?
Yeah.
When it's like, let's go now, and you're like, oh, well, I got to put shit together.
Expecting you at all, actually. Oh, could I have maybe like 4 more months? And opportunity's like, no, bye.
Because opportunity has boundaries, and it's like, I ain't coming back. See you later. Like how that happens. If you can survive COVID. Oh my gosh. Yep, absolutely.
It pushed. I worked with many couples like pre and during and post. Not everybody made it. They're all alive, but their marriage maybe didn't make it. To be very clear, I did not kill anyone. That experience shaped them, and they realized, oh, who am I without all of my external coping skills when I can't go to the bar, the gym, all these other things? Did it shut them down and make them think like, well, this is just my fate now, I guess I have to accept it? Or did they get creative, and not every couple was on the same page about what path they were going to take. It shocked us all. I'm not saying it was like, oh, it's just a little blip. Like, it was a life-altering event for every person in many directions. But where's the resiliency? And then it really showed, who did I pick, right? Like, who did I pick to rely on in this long-term journey, ideally?
Well, and so like, I'll just self-disclose here. When COVID hit and everything locked down, I was living in Southern California. And my wife all of a sudden was like, I need something to do because just sitting in four walls isn't going to work. So she became a very avid baker. And I still laugh to this day because I remember doing like drug deals out of the back of a Toyota to get flour. I need non-bleached flour. And I remember like cash only or Venmo deals of buying this in back alleys. And people were like, well, why would you do this? And it was like, because that's what my spouse needed. And what's funny, I reaped a lot of benefits of it. Sure, I ate a shit ton of carbs, but I also...
I now know the best recipe for every baked good. So who wins, really?
Absolutely. But it was also like, it became something fun of like, how can I help you? I never knew I would know what I know about proofing and yeast and like starter. And there was a lot of things that, again, I wouldn't have moved into that space, but I had two choices. I could sit on Xbox and play Call of Duty till I turned blue in the face, or I could join in with my wife and like, what do you want to do? And so when we talk about COVID, and even like when we go out and have like couples dates and people talk about how absolutely miserable it is, my wife and I are kind of still stunned in some ways of sitting back and going like, we had a lot of fun, even though there was a lot of control that was taken from us.
Yes.
Sure, we would have wanted to go out and do things and places were closed. We had a lot of fun, and we focused on us because there was no one else to focus on.
Yeah.
But many of us, we went to different opposite ends of the house. We had our own rooms because we turned our rooms into offices. And then here's that big boundaries word. Our home lacked any boundaries. So what we were doing is we were sleeping at our offices and maybe sleeping with our coworkers. That was about it. But we didn't ever click out of like, hey, do you want to do something together?
Yeah.
Or I remember like my wife turning to me and like, let's go on a hike. And it was like, we are actually allowed to walk outside. So we went on, did stuff like that. And like I said, it takes the creativity and the imagination of like, well, what do we have in our control and in our influence that we can do?
Yes. And where was our own individual mental health at prior to, like you were mentioning earlier, opportunity knocks? Sometimes tragedy, catastrophe, change remarkably out of your control knocks also, or just kicks down the door like the Kool-Aid man, and you don't have a say. Right. And it's like the Dane Cook joke. He's like, are you going to fix that? Like, my dad's going to be pissed about this later. Can you imagine the damages? Oh, is he going to believe that? Oh, yeah. Big Kool-Aid man just kicked in our car. Like that. It's this shock that happens. And it's, where is your mental health at prior to that? And it really speaks to making the investment, whatever resource it is, time, money, effort. It might be time away from somebody, but time into yourself that makes you a better person. Can you set yourself up for success? And I think a lot of people, when COVID kicked down their door and it was not opportunity and it was a lot of tragedy and shock, and resiliency switch didn't kick on maybe as quickly, where was their mental health individually? And that's why I think it's so important, regardless of what is going on globally, to pick a partner who values their mental health and who values self-awareness and growth. Because when things like that happen, loss and tragedy happen constantly. You could have a miscarriage, you could have a parent die, you could have a pet. Like, life is not all the positive ends of the vows, is what I say all the time. Like, if you can look at that person and only ever get the negative ends and still feel like you won, that's the person that you want to marry. I'm not married because it was joy and this, and we went on all these trips and vacations, and you make a mean banana bread and that was it. It's like, is this the person I want by me if I get bad news? Is this the person I want to be holding my hand if my parent passes? Like, those kinds of choices were what I based those decisions off of. It's not about how good it could be on Instagram. Who cares? That app could go away literally tomorrow. Who are you going to be? Like, where's your mental health going to be? Probably better without it, but yeah.
Well, I love how you frame that, because I always say, can you suffer with that person?
Yeah.
Not for, not because.
No, with.
suffer with them? Can you sit in pain? Because that's probably the hardest part as a spouse, is when you do not have anything at your disposal to help that person through that tragedy or that trauma.
Right.
And I know men who sit in that space when they're trying with their significant other to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Every month when that period comes,
Mm-hmm.
you realize that this month it didn't happen either.
Yeah.
A lot of men get frustrated because they go, well, what can I do? I can't do anything. And sometimes it's not even that you have to do anything. It's like, what I want you to know is I want you to move into the space of, what can you do to support her in that? Ask.
Yeah.
Like, we need to hold each other. Do we need, like, the phrasing I also use with my men is I go, how about you walk up to your significant other and ask them how you can serve them that day? They're like, that sounds freaking weird. Why would I do that? And I was like, because that's a part of love.
Yes.
And so when we move into that, that has sometimes become something very powerful when men feel powerless in that moment of like, okay, well, what can I do to serve you in that? And sometimes it's going to be grab the chunky monkey, grab, whatever, and we're going to sit and I'm going to cry and be in a space of not telling me to stop.
Yes. Let me just be a mess till I stop. And that is actually such sage and wise advice. It's such a gift, I think, that when we're articulate as a woman, we can give to a man. I love your problem solving skills. I love how desirous you are of wanting to solve and fix. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is for you to be so good at it and not be able to do it. And this is unfortunately one of those times it's out of our control, that I don't need that skill set from you. I so wish I could, but it's just going to fall short and make us both frustrated. Could we have this instead? And that's what I teach a lot of my women and couples to do. And the men I've worked with one-on-one, I kind of coach them on, like, you can ask for this of your partner, or explain from the woman's perspective, like, she said this, but this is what really is going on. And they're like, oh, I wish you would just say it like that. And I'm like, yeah, you're also looking at like years and years worth of training and books and my own experiments gone well or gone wrong in my own life. And they're like, okay, that makes more sense. And so being able to ask of our partners what we really need and not be afraid that we won't get it, or not be afraid that we'll be shamed or told to, like, all right, 5 minutes is enough, because they're sitting, understandably, potentially with their own discomfort, or that we're trained as women, we're trained by babies from infancy, from when they're an infant, and we're comfortable with, let me try anything to make it work. And that's not necessarily, we're getting there with more evolution, but that's not necessarily the way that men are trained at all, because that's not their role biologically. When we go back in the day for evolutionary psychology, it's more like, let me fix it. If I can win at it, I'll do it. If I can't, I won't. And they feel you're just continuing to cry, I can't fix this, what's the point? Not realizing it's the long-term benefit. And I think being explained, like, this actually helps you in the long term to feel closer to your partner. It increases the likelihood of intimacy. It increases the likelihood of sex, because we know you'll be there for us when life gets messy, and we can fall apart in a contained space and then move on with our life, versus trying to shove down crying for a month. That's when we explode at you and you're like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I totally missed the first 5 minutes of that because I was so afraid, but why are you crying? What's going on?
That I don't like Real Housewives of Orange County. Well, boom, and there we go. Like, but when you were talking about, like, the letting our significant others cry, so often as men, we step into that space and we feel rejection. And this goes back to, like you were just saying, it's like the hunter-gatherer mentality, right? Like, if it caused a problem for the village, what did we do? We killed it. And it's like, and then you work your way back to, like, we're not killing saber-toothed tigers anymore. We're trying to kill the emotions in our wives. And if we can't kill the emotion in our wives, then I'm going to internalize it that I suck as a hunter and a provider. And now I'm going to withdraw and I'm going to isolate, or I'm going to stop being present in these moments because I'm feeling like I'm already set up to fail.
Yes.
And that is something that once you bring that awareness up, and it's funny because a lot of times with my male clients, once we start really talking about how much power rejection has in their lives, they get equally pissed at their emotional responses of rejection. Like, why have I not applied myself in all these other things? Because I've just simply told myself there's a possibility it may not go my way. And so what do? I just, screw it and move to the next thing. And so once we understand that side of like me sitting with my wife as she is crying and she's getting over whatever trauma or whatever has happened and she's processing it, that's not a part for me to be in a rejection process, because what I'm doing is I'm taking her hurt and I'm making it my problem. And sometimes it's not going to be my problem.
Yeah, it could have absolutely nothing to do with the partner or the dyad of the relationship. It could be completely external, or something internal to the relationship brings up a previous time where we were activated or sad or felt like there was a loss or a rejection, and we're having a present day reaction to it. Our brain isn't so linear that it can't ever go back to the past. We often are frustrated because we're comparing it to what we wanted it to be in the future. In the same moment, we're experiencing the letdown and the loss of it's not that, and what could it have been, or what was it previously. We're very complex. We're very basic in many ways, but we're very complex in other ways, and we're not designed the exact same way. And that's the other part, is we're like the adversaries almost. So why do we have this expectation that it's like, oh, we're partners forever and always? It's like, no, we're not designed for that by default. That's a learned skill to partner with someone and to build a life with someone. You're two people building one life. That's going to be a lot of compromise and sacrifice and negotiation to get to that successfully.
Yeah. We can never ignore the fact that we have two uniquely individual people.
Yes.
And making a mutual agreement to do life together.
Mm-hmm.
They find that life together is more gratifying than them living life individually.
Right.
That does not mean that automatically we become some sort of like symbiotic relation where all of a sudden, like, now we're of one. Like, that doesn't work.
Like the couples who have the same Facebook or Instagram account. I'm like,
I always be like, so who cheated first? Come on. I need to.
Trust issue. Where did the enmeshment start? Oh, with your mom. Okay, this makes sense.
Oh, it's just easier. For who?
For me to control him. Okay, that part is silent. Don't go digging.
Yeah.
Friend us or delete the request.
I love that, because I feel like sometimes I'm like, and I know this is probably not going to play well, but sometimes I feel like I'm emotional daycare, and like women, they're men, and they're like, fix him. And it's like, oh, okay, but we're going to circle back to you. I'm sorry, what?
Me? No. I think you misheard me. It's him. He's the problem. I'm like, but you play a role in it, lady. And that's, I think, why I have a benefit, because I will call women out left and right in a loving way. But you know me, I'm very assertive. I will call them out and be like, and I think this is going to be problematic because you're expecting him to be like a woman. And that's essentially what they're saying when they drop him off. It's like, make him a hairy woman. Yeah. Which is not what we want, because I've heard women complain too when they're in the dating relationship, like coaching sphere, of like, oh, he's too emotional. I'm like, you can't have it both ways, lady. You either get the guy who's emotionally available and you're going to see vulnerability, which might mean things that you adjusted to, and you can't shame him for that, or laugh when he cries, or do these things that are guaranteeing he will never show that side of himself again. Like, you have to change if you want your partner to change.
Well, yes, because we're starting to get into this conversation where they'll be like, well, I don't want to lead this relationship. I want him to be a man. And then when he starts leading the relationship, they go, well, I don't like where you take me. And so all of a sudden you get this situation where this is that male that is going to go quiet, and they're going to isolate, and they're not going to show themselves emotionally, but they're going to be present for, like, when the paycheck goes through. They're going to make sure that the roof is good. They're going to make sure that the oil change has been done on the car, but then they're not going to actually be productive in other areas. Why? Because you've emasculated them at that point. And I know that a lot of people then get sort of hell-bent on the language I'm using there, but
it's emasculation.
You've taken this person and you've basically said, if you've already procreated, if we already have the kids, I don't need that side of you anymore. I just need you to essentially be the janitorial service of the house. That is the part that it is absolutely not what women are looking for in their marriages, but there's a stereotype to it. And the stereotype is not something that we're shooting for. And that's why I talk a lot with the clients I work with of like, well, what would you want in your relationship? And what's amazing is, especially like when I can sit there with my couples clients, and all of a sudden you'll hear that husband be like, well, you know what, I actually have always wanted to go to France or to Europe. Or they'll bring up something that, like, in their sphere of control is a highly romantic thing that they've wanted to do with their spouse, but they've never felt like they could implement it because they didn't feel like the vulnerability from their spouse was present as well. And it's funny because you get like that neck snap out of the spouse of like, you want to go away with me? And it's like, well, yes, I have wanted to go away with you, but between you telling me that I'm good for nothing, like, and how I can't be like Jim, Rachel's husband, guess what? I don't want to do that. And like, it's unfortunate that we have to reach that point, but sometimes it's that light bulb moment that's like, okay, let's talk about dating. Or this is the thing I love to tell people, especially when they tell, oh, my children are my life. And I'm like, so where is your marriage in that? And they'll talk about, well, like, it's real busy. We got work. We got all these kids in club sports and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what would it be like for you if I came in and I said, let's put the marriage first and everyone else will get fed if there's leftovers? And they, what? Like, that sounds so selfish. And I was like, well, there's two things we can be doing here. We can be essentially raising a healthy family dynamic where our kids are actually watching us pour into each other, love each other, and how to have a respectful relationship. Or we can raise highly selfish children who only think that they are God's gift to the rest of us. And a lot of times, number two. Why? Because it's easier to do that. Because I get gratification in a relationship with a child if I buy them the Xbox, the PS4, the Jordans, the what. I can get a ton of instant gratification of feeling like I'm the best mom or dad on the planet. And that's going to require less input than me struggling through with my significant other on how do we build better attachment? How do we feel more loved and served in this? Shit, take the kid to Disneyland.
Yeah, I think from what I have learned over the last many years studying psychoanalysis and being trained in it, this experience of not wanting to be the bad object. And I think we're pitted against that being a parent and a partner at the same time. I don't want to be a bad object in my child's eyes, but I also don't want to be a bad object in my partner's eyes. So who do I pick, right? And like your point a few moments ago, well, we already did the thing. We got married, we had kids, we this. Legally, it would take you a while to leave me anyway. Like, you kind of have this built-in buy-in of like, I think I'll kind of sacrifice the marriage in this moment to make my child see me as a good object so they won't scream at me. So bedtime's easier. So they don't talk to, their friends' parents, and then I get a bad rap. Like, there's so much reputation protection that's subconscious in these processes. And that's why it's so difficult for parents when we get older and we point out to them, hey, loved 1 through 9 about childhood, didn't love 10. And they have this visceral reaction of like, well, I did the best I could. You're so unappreciative. Look at all this other stuff I did. You're like, I just listed it 1 through 9, because in that moment, they're being seen as a bad object. And there's a lack of tolerance to be seen as both. That was like, wow, I that was never my intention to give you that experience. I'm so sorry that is how you process it and internalize it. Is there anything I can do now for you? Or do you just want me to share that with me? Like, does sharing that with me have you, feeling better about our relationship? And often it's like, yeah, that would work. But how many parents are really going to know to say that? Obviously, and that's part of like my crusade when I work with couples and just people, is like, be a better person at hearing somebody else's truth, even if it's uncomfortable for you. Chances are you're getting defensive, unless they're saying it absolutely like rudely.
Yeah.
Are you getting defensive because some part of it does ring true for you, or deep down, when they were younger and you did those things, you're like, oh shit, I hope this doesn't come back to me. And it inevitably does. And you could honestly follow every parenting book to a T, or every partner, marriage, like spouse book to a T. Their own unique perspective and the blueprints they come from are going to have them see you as a bad person, or that you failed at some points. Just accept it. accept it before you get married and accept it before you have kids, that your partner and your kids are going to feel like you failed them at times. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're a human being and they're having their own unique experience of things you did or didn't do. And they're allowed to have that. And how they say it, of course, matters, but they're allowed to have their own reaction to it. And putting your marriage first makes a huge difference in how your kids are raised. And so they don't get the mommy special angel syndrome, as I like to call it, where they're just like, well, I don't think you know who I am. I'm mommy special angel, so I will actually not be doing any of those things in my marriage. And the husband's like, I can't do this. Like,
no, and you talk about essentially the perfection side of it,
yes.
where you have to be the perfect spouse and be seen as a perfect spouse, then you lack any ability of showing grace or mercy to your spouse.
Correct.
And so I always live the saying, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. I know that I'm going to down. I know that I'm going to do stupid things. This isn't a permission slip for me to do stupid things. That took me a while to learn this, but it does allow me to say, you know what? I know I'm not going to be perfect. And then in moments where my wife, again, rarely is not perfect, then in those moments, I can be like, oh, wow, she needs a little more grace, needs a little bit more mercy, or more, how do I come in and how do I serve you in those? I can see it was a really hard day. How can I do that? And so when people bring up critical things of you, it doesn't mean that they're being condescending or they're being hostile to you. And you want people to bring up critical things. You do not want relationships where people don't say anything, because you want to know what happens. If they don't say anything, they disappear.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to know why? Because I already have made that decision that it's not going to be worth my time and effort to bring this up, because that person won't be willing to hear it or be in a space to implement any change.
Yep.
So that's the biggest thing when I'm working with spouses is like, well, they were very critical this week. Well, let's go through it. Talia, you sort of hinted at it. There's times that we can be just critical to be critical. We're in our own hurt. That's But if someone said, you told me that you were going to do the dishes tonight, and then you didn't do them, but you told me in the morning you were going to do them when you got home, and it's been a couple days, and so I ended up having to do that. And it just makes me feel like I'm not seen and heard. And there's always the red herring. Well, is it just about dishes? Well, no. She's not going to ask you for the other things, because asking you for freaking dishes wasn't listened. Well, we don't. So you'll have sex for dishes? I have no idea, how does this work out? And then let's talk about the transactional side of what we're talking about, where it's now tic-tac-toe. I do this, you do that. I do this, you do that. And there's nothing sexy about that. There's nothing vulnerable about that. Because now I have to go into my own piggy bank, my emotional piggy bank, and be like, can I afford to ask her to do this? Because it's going to cost this much. And she's on the other side saying, well, yeah, I don't really want to sleep with someone who seems like he's just a prostitute. He's willing to do things for money.
Right. Yeah. And not having the follow through on seemingly smaller asks that still make a big impact. I want to be very clear. When the dishes and laundry get done and the household runs properly, it's smoother for everyone involved. I'm not discounting that, but that's a small ask that if it didn't get done, it's not life or death, or the life or death of the relationship, right? So if you are in the sphere, whoever is watching this now or will be watching this in the future, and you mean well, and you want your yes to be a yes, but somewhere you can't actually follow through on that, or you have no intention of following through, you just want to sound good. As a woman, we don't love when that's the pattern. We would prefer being told no, and we would prefer, if you can't do it then but can do it at a different time, to tell us that. We don't actually want the people pleasing, the over kind of excitement of, yes, I'll do anything, because we can't do everything. And being diligent about what you can and can't say yes to gives us an honest perspective. And if couples were like this from the start before they ever got married, some may not end up together if we were truly honest about what we're willing and not willing to do in a relationship. And over time, we might understand, okay, I actually have to be willing to do those things, or I have to be willing to put some amount of my income towards a housekeeper or a nanny, or solving the problem, whether it's myself doing it directly or doing it indirectly through whatever means and resources I have. That is a huge part of being married and staying in a relationship, because we're not going to want to nobody wants to do the dishes. No. rarely, unless it's like cleaning is your kink and you love organizing and stuff. But even then, that's the last thing you'd want to do for free, right? We're not paid. I used to be a live-in nanny for many years. I love organizing, love cleaning, would pride myself on how much I could get done in the whatever couple hours I was there. And that was a long time ago. And now the thought of doing that for my own self, can I? Sure. Are there certain days where it strikes me and I want to? Yeah. But for the most part, that doesn't bring me the same joy because I'm not getting something from it. I'm not getting money from it, and I'm not getting external validation of the families having an easier life. It's just me living a little bit better. And I'm kind of like, okay. So knowing when and what to outsource and understanding the value of your partner, having that follow through, right? Can I ask for this and can it be done? And if it can't be done, can you tell me that? Number one success, I think, and key in staying in a happy relationship is being honest and being your follow through. And you know what? You can renegotiate. You could wake up the next day and be like, I know I told you I would do the dishes last night, and I just looked at my schedule today and I realized I'm not going to have time to do it. Can we renegotiate, or would you be okay waiting another 2 days? And you have my word. And this is where it's hard for couples, because if they've broken the word before, the likelihood I'm going to trust in the future is not as high, but then it starts to repair trust if you start to follow through again.
But if you never give the space to rebuild the trust, then we can, and that is the struggle of, like, I also call it like the Rolodex of problems. We keep these Rolodexes, and for a lot of people out there, I guess, who are too young to know that, so let's just go with Blackberries. So, but it's
like a notes app. You have like a tally mark, a scorecard. Yes.
Like this, it's almost like the reverse burn book, right? Where it's just like everything that is this person has done wrong. And so guess what? Anytime this person brings up either needing mercy, needing grace, needing space, we immediately go to, so last year at this time, you did this and then you failed to do that thing. And so why your request is being denied. And so what we're doing is we're pigeonholing our spouse into you can only be this. And like you were bringing up, then we're essentially saying you can only be the bad thing. I like to call it the identified patient. Like what you're essentially telling your spouse is, you are the problem for everything that's in this relationship, anything that doesn't go right, and it's gonna remain that way till the end of time. So then the contract flips to where, like, death do you part starts to sound wonderful.
Like, please off me. I cannot handle being in this relationship.
You know, really need to get on blood pressure meds, and you're like, what would it do to me? Like, you'd have a die. Win. And so, like, there's.
Can I get a timeline on this?
Like, give me the odds here. So anyway, but this is what we're doing is, again, I always love to ask my couples, are you setting yourself up for success? And, like, I love watching them look back and they're like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, I showered today. No, did you actually set your guys up for success? Because you were talking about the negotiation. Sometimes you also have to be present enough to realize that your spouse has just signed themselves up for something that they cannot do. Yes. Like, no, you're not going to work a full day and then come home and, cook dinner, eat all this. You're going to be a mess. It's just not going to work. So let's try to find something different. Can we negotiate in that so that maybe I'm going to cook and then you do the dishes or something like that? What is the way to do that? And if we're not able to sometimes save our spouses from themselves, guess what? They're not going to have the space to do that for us.
Correct.
Because there's been plenty of times, and I also want to just come out and come clean. Just because I'm a therapist who's married doesn't mean my marriage is perfect. Like, I fight over the stupidest crap ever. Like, and in my head, I'm like, I know this isn't turning towards you, but I'm going to make it work.
It feels good in the moment. Yeah.
Ends the argument without being emotional. And this is like what I'm going to do, right? And I know it's like I'm just watching a train wreck that I can't away from, but I'm so hell-bent on, like, my needs in that moment. And so I always laugh because people will be like, oh wow, you spoke into my marriage and you really helped me. And then, like, they'll turn to my wife at times and, like, be like, oh, you're so lucky. She's like, you would only know. So
banana bread, she's like, oh yeah, all right.
yeah, it's all perfect about this. But I mean, it's it's the truth though. We might have all the right answers in our heads, but applying them to our lives in the thick of it, still very difficult. Whether you have the degrees and the years of training, or you're starting out fresh and you're down this road, it's going to be equally difficult. And why? Because it's not a logical solution.
Correct.
In the logic, but then we're having to make present emotions. And emotions are the things that are always going to disrupt logic. Why? Because emotions aren't logical, and thank God they're not logical. We would not want to be a robotic society where it's just like, you can procreate with me. Let's go ahead and do that.
Right.
The bigger part of this, and it's when we can actually bring in our emotions and recognize sometimes, like, you know, maybe I need to take a break from this conversation. I am getting overwhelmed, and I don't want to say something that's going to be hurtful.
Right.
When realizing this is something within me. Those awarenesses are the most fun.
Yeah. And I think that is the perfect like pause point for us before I want to have you on again to do like a part 2, like really diving in, like what it's like being a married therapist and knowing better, choosing evil at many times, and just be like a better partner and learn more about being in relation to men, because it's not a crusade I think we can do alone. So if you would like to come back on, I would love to have you on. Awesome. Is there anything that you have that you're doing right now that you want to let the audience know about before we wrap up?
Pretty much I would just check out Wild Ethos Counseling on Instagram. I'm doing more reels on that. I'm trying to get that one moving more. Pretty much you can find me there. And that's about it.
Okay, well, we will definitely check out your reels. I think we could do a combo one. That would be very fun. If you pick an audio that you like, we can just like collaborate and post it.
Sounds good, Talia. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. And if anybody has questions, we'll check the comments after this is already uploaded, and then I will send you the link to be on for part 2.
Perfect. Thank you.
Bye.